Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Silicon Minds, Human Hearts. Today we'll be interviewing Farzad, who's a principal product manager at Microsoft. Thank you, Farzad, for joining us today. Could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Farzad Sunavala. I work for Microsoft, the product Azure AI Search. I'm a principal product manager, and happy to be here talking about all things AI.
Now, AI Search, for the ones who have never used AI Search or have no clue what it is, what is it?
Yeah, Azure AI Search is a retrieval system inside of the Microsoft Azure platform, and you use it for plenty of different things. You can use it for e-commerce websites. You could use it for probably the most popular use case we hear now, which is Retrieval Augmented Generation, a common design pattern for building generative AI applications such as ChatGPT on your own data. We have a big suite of features that integrates with popular frameworks like LangChain, Llama Index, Semantic Kernel. Also within the Azure OpenAI service, you could use Azure Search as a data source. And we also spend a lot of effort making sure we have the best models to ensure you get the best search quality when you use our service. So yeah, it's a great product.
Now, as a principal product manager, what is your job?
It's definitely a mix of everything. It's a mix of kind of product leadership, setting the product strategy, also a bit of product design, also a bit of, to some extent, developer advocacy. So making sure that the engineers who do a great job spend a lot of time building a product, making sure that it's actually something that customers want. And so how can you make it simple for folks around Microsoft and customers around the world to easily use our user interface, to use for the developers, to use our client SDKs, Python, JavaScript, .NET. And it's essentially just grow the product.
Okay. So you said before, or the tool is a lot used now these days for RAG application. What does that involve?
Yeah, so the design pattern retrieval augmented generation, it's really been very popular ever since kind of OpenAI's ChatGPT came out. And a lot of customers around the world want to build their own ChatGPT on your own data. And one of the design patterns or mechanisms to chat with your own data is this design pattern called Retrieval Augmented Generation, which in a nutshell is a way where you put all your enterprise or private data into a retrieval system like Azure AI Search. And then once you have a language model such as GPT-4o or Phi-3, whatever it might be, and in order to interact with that language model, it usually has limitations from a knowledge cutoff perspective, and then also just an information perspective. It's not going to know anything about my private data if the model wasn't pre-trained on it. So retrieval augmented generation allows you to retrieve from a data source or vector database or search engine, whatever you want to call it, and then ground a large language model. So you're augmenting the prompt with your own data to feed it the information, and then you get a nice generative response over your own data.
Okay. That's RAG. Do you see any other opportunities that are coming up around that?
Yeah, I think RAG is definitely, it's a big debate with long context models and things like that. I personally think RAG is definitely here to stay, especially with kind of an emerging trend. I know we'll talk about the future of AI. I think an emerging trend is once you kind of master RAG, you have really good accuracy, really good performance, and there's a lot of research on how to get the best RAG performance for building Gen AI applications. I think the next big thing is building agents. And so how you get these RAG systems to talk to each other. And so getting RAG accuracy is going to be absolutely critical in the years to come.
Okay. So would that mean you have like an agent that has access to one particular knowledge base and then another agent who has knowledge of has access to another knowledge base? Why don't we put it in all at once?
Yeah, good question. So there's a few design reasons why. So when you build an enterprise agent, there's a common term that's kind of been popularized by the industry now, such as function calling or tool use, as LangChain and Llama Index like to call it, where you build certain tools. And one tool could be a query engine tool. And this query engine tool could be pretty much a retrieval augmented generation application where you build a vector index, you ground it to a language model. And for building agents, a lot of times there's different tools that need to be involved. So you could have one vector index that has, some unstructured data. You could have one that maybe connects to a different data source with a different schema or something like that. So ultimately, putting all those puzzle pieces together with the underlying fundamental architecture being RAG is going to be critical for getting these agents to talk to each other.
Okay. Now, you mentioned the word vector now.
Yes.
What is a vector?
Yeah, so in simplest form, going back to our math and science and physics days, a vector in the kind of AI world, I like talking about vectors as kind of universal representations of data. Okay, so whether you have text, images, video, audio, whatever your medium of data may be, there's a concept called embeddings that it's been around for a while in the data science community. But with the kind of emergence of OpenAI and embedding models produced by OpenAI, it's extremely easy for developers and data scientists and AI engineers around the world to simply just call a REST API endpoint, give it whatever text, what is the capital of France, and you get a vector representation of that text, which can be used for a variety of different use cases, such as cosine similarity search or semantic search or vector search, recommendations, and a whole bunch of other use cases that can enable these retrieval augmented generation applications.
Then what's the specific difference between an embedding model and then the GPT-4o models, for example? We cannot just choose a GPT-4o for embedding.
Right. So the difference is between a chat completion model, and those examples would be something like GPT-4o or GPT-3.5 Turbo. And then there's also embedding models, which actually come out as a kind of side effect of the training process of building these language models. And these embedding models essentially are pre-trained on probably something very similar to the data that GPT-4o was trained on. And it allows you to vectorize this entire corpus of data, such as text in most cases, and get that universal representation, pretty much having a text input into a bunch of different numbers inside of a vector space.
Okay, so one completes what you're saying, and the other one just converts it.
Converts it to that universal representation. Yeah.
All right, cool. Now, we've seen how all these new models have really evolved what's happening in businesses. Are there any particular use cases that you know of that you freely can talk about as like, this is really a really nice solution that they've been working on?
Yeah, of course. I'll talk about some public use cases that are all available on customers.microsoft.com. One that we recently just launched is a partnership with PricewaterhouseCoopers, where they actually developed their chat PwC application, which allows all PwC employees, whether you're a tax professional, whether you're a consulting professional, it allows you to leverage all the information within PwC, which is a large global enterprise. So you could imagine about probably the petabytes of data that they may have inside of their enterprise. And it allows you to seamlessly chat with the user interface, very similar to ChatGPT, and it allows you to see the actual citations and grounding within your retrieval augmented generation application. And so the business value has been incredible for the unlocking time savings, unlocking instant access to information, in some cases even automation of activities. So that's one really, really cool use case I highly recommend checking out.
Okay. I think many will have the question on that use case, like you have a big organization and it has access to a lot of data. Does everyone has access to everything now?
Yeah, so security is something that's absolutely critical when building these applications. A lot of people think about building RAG apps and they're just throw everything into a vector database, throw it to GPT-4o, and then bam, you get an answer. So within Azure AI Search, we actually are an enterprise-ready vector database. So what does that mean? That means we have built-in security mechanisms, and this goes beyond just having compliance certifications, things with GPDR and whatnot. But we actually have mechanisms in place to authenticate via Microsoft Entra ID or managed identity. So in the enterprise world, everyone has an email alias, Outlook, Gmail, whatever it might be. You log in, and then you have certain permissions attached to your email or alias, to your identifier. And so when you design your RAG application, you want to make sure that you have built-in security protocols, because when you query something, you want to make sure you only have access to the information that you're allowed to from an authentication perspective. So there's great ways you can do that using the security filter predicate pattern within Azure AI Search.
So not everyone needs to have access to everything.
Exactly.
Okay, that's a a good one, to understand, of course. We have RAC, we have agents where we'll use tools that can call other SQL databases, can do anything you want, can also do actions. What do you think is going to be next?
Yeah, great question. I still think if year 2023 was all about, understanding generative AI, what really the capabilities are, how does interacting with language models work, and I think it was more about just building prototypes. 2024, we've seen, as I mentioned, with the public use cases, we've seen a lot of customers go into production with these RAG applications, and it's all single-step reasoning. I still think in 2025, in the enterprise world, we're going to see a lot of people wanting to build agents, which is how you can enable multi-step reasoning, getting these different RAG applications to talk to each other. And with that, as I mentioned earlier, you need very, very high levels of accuracy and to some extent performance, depending upon the use case. So going beyond that, I think once you have these multi-step reasoning agents talking to each other, we've already seen a few with the Microsoft AutoGen. We've seen people publish agentic stories where they look at the life of a software engineer or of a consultant, and they look at all the different tasks they have during their day job. And if you have an agent through all these mechanisms I talked about, RAG, tool use, function calling, natural language SQL, whatever it may be, you pretty much have all the scaffolding in place to really automate a lot of activities. And when you automate a lot of activities, that frees, people up to do more, spend your brain power on more strategic things. So I think that whole, talk about AGI, I think we're getting very, very close to it.
So you said we have agents that will start reasoning more and use specific tools. How does, for example, GPT-4o01 make a difference into that?
Yeah, great question. So with the newest GPT-4o1-preview and I think o1-mini,
let's call it Raspberry.
Call it Raspberry, Strawberry, whatever,
Strawberry.
whatever the nickname was. The cool thing about that is, and I've actually been using it a lot just personally in my personal time, just to see the PhD level, mathematical equations and knowledge that it has in terms of generation. And I think the main business value that using, the latest and greatest models from OpenAI in this example is giving it that next level understanding of analytical reasoning. And so I think that's going to be really, really big for doing more complex things such as, mathematical equations, more data-driven analysis to make certain decision-making. Just yesterday, funny story, I used it to actually do an analysis on whether I should put an offer on a house and if it was, priced fairly. And it asked me for some input data on similar houses and what they sold for in the area, whether it was, freehold, leasehold, what the service amenities were. And it went through a full calculation and gave me a quantitative, approach as if I was, a PhD in, applied mathematics or something. Mm-hmm. And, it really helped my grounding and understanding.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Because I find it interesting that you say also mathematical solutions, because we still see on social media those screenshots of people who try to use math for math equations, and even with 401 they try it and then it still fails.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, and this is where I think there's an old phrase I remember when I was studying data science that all models are wrong, some are useful, and I think that it still holds no matter how much the expectation changes of area of generative AI and large language models, where there's always going to be areas where a model will fail, and that's when incorporating feedback, saying, hey, this is the output I expected versus what I actually received, because at the end of the day, the underlying architecture is just transformer-based architectures. These models are trained just on a sequence of characters. And so it's giving the illusion to a lot of people that this is a magic button, it could do, whatever I want it to do. And in most cases it can, but there's always going to be those edge cases of opportunities to improve. Yeah. And you can mitigate that through, prompt engineering, probably the most simplest one.
What would you tell businesses now to start looking into?
Yeah. I think at the highest level, I think defining your AI strategy enterprise strategy is absolutely critical. So, if you're an enterprise architect or even solution architect, or even a business stakeholder, you really want to start leveraging AI and just learning more about it at the highest level, what it is, what its capabilities are. And some advice that I would do, because I was in the enterprise world prior to Microsoft, I would actually look at similar use cases in not just my industry, but other industries, and enable a culture of innovation diffusion where you can learn certain things about different companies. For example, if you work in energy, look into what the tax world is doing. See if you can start brainstorming different use cases, things that you can automate, have more value creation within the business.
And what kind of advice would you just give people in general?
Yeah, just learn more about AI. There's so much tools, research out there, and some of it's free. Actually, majority of it I think is free. And so there's a lot of different things, from just learning about applications of generative AI to actually getting even more hands-on and being a practitioner in terms of building your own AI applications using services, of course, like Azure AI Search and Azure OpenAI. I think just getting started is step one, and you'll see an endless area of opportunity.
Start to learn, be curious.
There we go.
All right. Thank you very much, Farzad, for this interesting conversation. Hope to hear more from what the search team is bringing, and also your blog post, your interesting blog post.
Thank you. Appreciate it.